Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to this evening's meeting. So I shall make a start with the first item, which is apologies for absence and substitutions.
Chairman.
Thank you. I believe we have two people that will be along in 30 minutes or so, and that's Councillor Land and Councillor Barry. So we're expecting them to arrive later. Can I do item 2, which is minutes of last meeting? Are we all happy with that? Should we propose it? Do I have a seconder? Okay. Thank you for that. Declarations of interests. Are there any? Okay. If anything comes up during the meeting, please do say, and we'll include it at that point. Questions on notice pursuant to Council Procedure Rule 38.
Chairman, we have none.
We have none. I don't think we ever have we?
This committee has had questions under Rule 38.
All right, okay.
I'm sure Councillor Griffiths will probably recount to you the opportunity that he's used for that.
Okay, we'll move on to item 5, portfolio holder introduction, portfolio holder for housing and planning. Now, welcome Councillor Baker to the meeting. As we've said to previous ones, this is not a cross an examination or a scrutiny or anything like that. This is just an opportunity for the scrutiny committee to hear from each portfolio holder in turn their thoughts and ideas for the future and where the direction they see the council going in. So with that, Councillor Baker, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you for the invitation. Although it says portfolio holder for housing and planning, I also have licensing and revenues and benefits, but I'm not going to go into revenues and benefits this evening. So I've put some notes together, so excuse me if I keep looking down because I don't want to forget anything. So I'll start with licensing. No current issues. Most licensing is either demand-led, taxis, licensed premises, etc., or response-led with regard to enforcement. Obviously, in the current climate, I will be meeting with officers quite soon to speak in regard to the budget and to identify if there's any savings that can be made. Obviously, we're all aware of how much we've got to save over the next 3 years. And the only thing of note as far was that we had an updated taxi private hire policy introduced late 2023, and that was adopted by Cabinet in November. I'll go on to planning, if I may. There's a number of conservation appraisals that have gone out, 20 in total. That started in 2020-21, so we've actually had 20 conservation appraisals done within the last 3 years, which I think is very commendable of officers. A number are still out for consultation or have recently finished, and they will be coming to Cabinet for adoption in the coming months. And then, like I say, that will conclude that part, which will go towards reinforcing what we're going to do with the review of the local plan, which I'll go on to as well. That's ongoing. A lot of work being done by a small team. Some policies are like to be removed, some revised, and some will be unchanged. The importance of the review, as we all know, is we adopted the last part of the plan in 2022, and within 5 years we have to review that. There's a very strict timetable. We actually want to, and this is something that myself and Mr. Guyver need to keep a close eye on, is that there's 15 months before we want to submit that to the Planning Inspectorate under the current rules. I won't go into the ins and outs of government keep changing the goalposts, but if we get it in by summer of 2025, the intention is that once it's been found, we can adopt it as our local plan autumn 2026, and then that will run till 2041. So it extends our current plan by 8 years, I think that is. Obviously, another thing that's very important is the well, it probably will be golden, the Tendring Colchester border garden community. The development plan for that was submitted to the planning inspectorate in September last year. An inspector's been appointed. No definite date has been set for a hearing, but they reckon it's going to be four days. And again, after that's been found sound, after any modifications required to the policies within that development plan document, that will be the document that guides the planning around the garden community for a considerable amount of time. And I've been informed that there may be a hybrid planning application coming forward from the developer, Latimer. We were thinking it was going to be this year, but it's now likely to be next year because of the things that are still needing to be sorted out. And obviously we don't have the DPD in place. So once that's in place, we'll be fine with that. And just quickly on other planning, Jaywick Sands Place Plan, the final consultation on that document has been done. Once the comments that have been made on that are taken into consideration, that report is likely to be presented at Cabinet April or May. I would say probably May rather than April. We've also got two neighbourhood plans that have been put forward by two parish councils, Ardley and Elmstead Market, both at varying stages. Ardley is a little bit more advanced than Elmstead Market. And we've also got a number of large applications coming forward. One of those is in front of the Planning Committee on the 18th of this month. That is with regard to the mitigation site for Bathside Bay. So where we're going to do, where the container port is going to be, although there's an application into change of use to change that to be something to do with the renewable energy field, the mitigation site for there will be heard here, and that's the only thing that's on the agenda. That's going to be quite a comprehensive application. It's very important that we get that right. The challenges in planning are that there was a cost pressure in 23-24 of £250,000. Planning is reliant on planning applications. Obviously, we don't have any. We don't have an income with the relevant fees. So you can get peaks and troughs throughout the year, which would normally balance out. The issuing of cost awards against this council in March last year, which we approved at Cabinet in November, of over £100,000, cannot be underestimated. And I wouldn't like us to be in that position again. But I'll leave that where it is. I'm going to be meeting with Mr. Guyver and other officers, discuss the planning budgets for 24-25. Again, where savings can possibly be made. So as you can see, just from that brief bit, there's a lot going on in planning with regard to big things. But there's also the day-to-day jobs as well. So our officers work very hard. There's a small team and they work very hard in planning to get us where we are. Housing is the biggest thing that I deal with. It's the biggest issue. It has the biggest issues, a lot of issues. So I'll just go through what's happening. So Honeycroft, that will be built out. The site over in Lawford, that will be built out by the 31st of October with occupation soon after. That's what I've been told. I'm going to hold the builders to it. And myself and Mr. Williams have been speaking recently about the possibility of using that opportunity to free up potentially under-occupied properties locally. So if we have somebody in a house, it may be more beneficial for them to move to a bungalow, but it's still going to be in the same place. But we've yet to fully explore that. Spendles, obviously we all know what's happening with Spendles. Temporary accommodation, 30 or 31 rooms. We couldn't actually work out what it was, but that site will be provided as temporary accommodation with occupation of it as soon after handover or completion this year. There is currently a delay due to a theft of numerous tools and other things which had to be replaced, and also damage to the site. So there is a slight delay. 2 members of staff have now been employed to run the scheme when it's up and running, to support those that are there, as well as managing temporary accommodation placements across the district. And in order to reduce the ongoing spending on temporary accommodation, which is a significant pressure for this council, well, nationally. An aspiration is to have similar properties like Spendle's owned by tendering for temporary accommodation, but that's at a very early stage and will be dependent on the properties being appropriate and obviously funding. So that's an aspiration. Since November, and this is all to do with a new regulatory regime that is coming into force in April, and I'll go into that in a minute. Currently there's a stock condition surveys of our own housing stock, and that will indicate where we have urgent or priority issues that need to be dealt with quickly. The intention is to achieve surveys of 25% of the housing stock a year. And like I say, they were started in mid-November, and as of yesterday, just under 300 have been completed. With the company that is doing the surveys actually ringing or contacting the council urgently on the day if they identify things that they think need to be brought to our attention quicker than just sending an email at the end of the week. And data obtained from these surveys, that will help us to plan where the improvements are required, where repairs need to be actioned quickly, as I've just said, and also ensures we are complying with the regulator for social housing, and this will be an ongoing task. So we will be looking at going forward, we will be inspecting, doing stock condition surveys of 25% or more if we can, if we have the funds each year. I mentioned about the regulatory regime, that's coming into force in April, 1st of April. See the council receive inspections from the regulator for social housing and the need to meet a whole host of new tenant satisfaction measures. DLUC is also looking at a decent home standard 2. Apparently that's going to be, we were expecting soon, but it's like to be the end of the year now, and that will influence where the housing investment programme is directed. So we've also got a number of new policies are coming forward in the next few months, as well as revisions due to either the housing ombudsman or the regulator, because they've come out with their own complaints procedure, and there's certain things in that that we need to align with. So that's where we are with regard to our stock. Homelessness, as the committee's well aware, as we're all aware everywhere, it's an increasing problem, not just locally, but regionally, but countrywide. You see it in the press every day. A number of reasons: the cost of living, inflation, the reduction of properties in the private rented sector, because landlords just don't know where they stand at times. And work is required to prevent homelessness, so the encouragement will be for people to approach our officers before they're actually kicked out, a long time before they're kicked out, saying, I've got this problem, so let's try and keep them in their own homes, or let's try and see where we can help them, signpost them, things like that. And that will then have, touch wood, an impact on the temporary accommodation costs that are going up. And we've got 3 new policies that were recently adopted to do with temporary accommodation deposits, and I can't recall the other one off the top of my head. Like I say, temporary accommodation seen a steady increase. For the calendar year 2023, excuse me, 369 households identified as having a priority need were placed in temporary accommodation, 369 households. And that was a mixture including children, obviously. In the last quarter of 2023, so October to December, 440 approaches to tendering as homeless, of which 142 were placed in temporary accommodation. I just thought I'd give you these figures so that you're aware of the demands that we face. In that same quarter, we had 132 were moved into settled accommodation, whether that was our stock or private rented. But those last figures may include those from the previous quarter to October to December. Government last week announced that the homelessness prevention grant for 24-25 for local authorities is, if I've added it up correctly, just over £1 million for this authority. I'm going to be meeting with Mr. Barrett quite soon to just go and make sure that my maths is correct, and then we'll go from there. I think I was asked at your meeting in January about acquisition and disposal of assets. And I was said previously, there's an intention to dispose of properties that are too costly to maintain or will never reach the decent home standard, whether that's the current one or the next one. Increasing our stock is important, but it needs to be in the areas where it's most needed, and that will be outlined in a strategic housing market assessment that will be being done for the local plan, which I think is going to be beginning of 2025 or thereabouts. There's also, in regard to assets, acquisitions, disposals, a new asset management plan is currently in draft form to deal with this. And hopefully that will be coming forward quite shortly. You'll be pleased to know that recently I signed a decision to accept 17 gifted units. There are more to come. And also just last week, initiation of the property dealing procedure for a further 2 properties in the north of the district. And hopefully we'll have some success there. So just before I finish, Chairman, there was a private landlords forum on the 29th, just last week, very well attended. And the feedback we've got is that it was useful for we didn't have a lot of people, but the people we did have were very engaging with us. So we're looking at holding that annually, if not more often, to get private landlords in, and also to inform them about the new rules and regulations that are coming in, because some of them came in and didn't know that they were going to be looked at, if you understand what I mean. We also had the first tenants panel in a year. Unfortunately, there wasn't a chairman prior to this year, so we had a meeting in this room. We now have a chairman. We're going to look to have quarterly meetings, if possible, but across the district, so they don't always have to come to Clacton. So that's something that we're looking to do. And one of the last things, I think you'll be glad. Yep. Healthy Homes Initiative in Jaywick, which has funding that was provided with, I'll say the NHS, but it was, yeah, the NHS. There's 3 stages to that initiative which have been undertaken, these being housing, improvement in housing, private housing, the environment and open spaces. So I'm due to receive a report in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, on the progress and measurable successes. But I am aware that there's quite a number of improvement notices and prohibition notices been served on landlords for properties that need to come up to a standard where they are decent for people to live in, because at the moment they aren't. And that will be ongoing. And that started last March. That's been going a year. And the second part of that, as I said, is environment. So in regard to that, there's a planned action week later this month in conjunction with different services within TDC and also our external partners, as well as all the local community groups coming together to improve their environment. And that, like I say, that will run for a week later in the month, and there's going to be a lot of publicity around that. And again, budgets. I think I answered Councillor Steady's question that you asked in January. So there will be 6 monthly reviews of the HRA 30-year plan. The next meeting is scheduled for May, and obviously we'll have one in November. And then look at how we use our funds more efficiently for the housing improvement programme for our own stock. So as you can see, there's across the 3 portfolios / 4, there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. Quite happy to take questions, Chairman, if you wish me to clarify anything.
Does anyone have any questions? Graham?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Baker. What do you do in the afternoons then? Sorry, just going back to the environmental day. Have you got a date for that, or is that? Oh, yeah. The environmental day. Have you actually got a date for that?
Yeah, it's an action week. A week, and it's 18th of March so it's the Monday to the Friday, and then there are certain roads being done each day within Jaywick.
Okay. Sorry, can I ask a couple more, Chair? Just talking about the garden communities. Um, I don't know whether I'm being a bit previous on this. Obviously, there's going to be schools involved in the garden community. Will there be a new school? So, do you envisage that new school taking in other areas? So, for instance, could a couple of the smaller schools be closed and to all go into a hub in the garden community?
To be perfectly honest, I don't know. We're in the early stages, aren't we? So looking at, and this is all from memory, so I stand to be corrected, but because of the size of the development over the period of time, obviously some of us won't be councillors and some of us may not even be alive by the time it's all finished. I think there will be a number of primary schools and potentially one secondary school, just in the garden community itself, with everything just there. But like I say, without looking at the full plans and the outline application that will come forward from Latimer, will have. I would presume, and it is a presumption, that they would have they would have an indicative layout as to what's going where. But I'm not sure about closing any schools. That would be a decision for obviously the county council rather than us.
And just one more if I can. I want to use the Q word now. Quarries. You know, there's quite a bit going on consultation with Essex County Council. Is there any possibility of us getting any, or Tendring District Council, getting any funding from those? Is there anything in legislation which says that the District Council would get? Because I'm not being cynical, but it just seems that the quarries are going to be in Thorrington, Bentley, Alsford, and whatever, and you've got the garden communities, which is just around the corner as well. But is there any spin-off for us?
Short answer, I don't know, but I will. If you're in agreement, Chairman, I'll ask Mr. Guyver, and when I see him next, or I'll email him and try and get you a reply. I honestly don't know, but I'm in agreement with you. I think we should.
Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, I've got one or two. I hope you don't mind. The first one, you mentioned Honeycroft. A couple of things on Honeycroft. I remember when we started out on this project, we did make an agreement that those that moved out would have an opportunity to move back if they so choose. I hope you know, it may be that they don't want to move back, they're happy with our, etc. But it was an agreement I remember we made when we met with the residents. So I see Damien nodding, so I don't expect many, but there's a possibility there. That's just something I thought I'd flag up. Secondly,
okay.
yeah, it was just because obviously you weren't in the position at the time, so when I just wanted to do it. So, you can. Or do you want me to wait for my second bit on Honeycroft? Okay.
I was the ward councillor for Lawford at the time when we closed it, and I was there when you were the portfolio holder for housing, and this council made a commitment to those that were moved out, some unwillingly, but it had to be explained to them why. That commitment still stands, that they will be first in the queue, if there is a queue. Unfortunately, I do know that at least 3 of them have since died. I do know, and one's a personal friend of my wife, she won't be coming back, she's moved back to live with family. There's a couple that won't want to come back, but I think I was told there's at least one out of that small group that does want to come back. So that person will be top of the list. This council made a commitment. your administration made a commitment, and I'm not going to break that. I don't think that'd be right. So I hope that puts your mind at rest.
Thanks very much for that. As I said, I forgot you attended that meeting and you lived in the area. I just wanted to raise it for obvious reasons as a reminder that we, as a council, we made that promise. The second part on Honeycroft, obviously where you're saying you're looking for people to downsize, is I wondered if you thought of incentives for people to do so. Obviously, when people move from one property to another, even though it's rented, it don't come cheap. So I wondered if there was you thought of incentives, for example, help with removal fees or furnishings, because it would benefit the council. It's freeing up a larger property. It's just something that crossed my mind.
I'm a great believer that we need to have some movement in our housing stock. And I've dealt with in the past people over occupying, under occupying, and it's like, they live opposite. It's like quite easy just do a swap and everybody be happy. We haven't discussed what incentives in full, but I think that if we're to encourage people to downsize and move, hopefully not too far out of the area or not out of the area at all, that we can assist them with if they do need to. And I'm making no commitments because obviously you've got to look at funding this. Things like if we need to move them from A to B, then we will assist and facilitate that. If they need white goods and things like that, I've not had that conversation, but that is something that we can take forward, and it will form part of the discussion around that, I'm sure.
Okay, thanks very much for that. The next one is you touched on JWIC project, which was health funded. A couple of residents have been in touch. They're concerned that the original officers have moved to other areas and it's now being covered rather than officers permanently, or say permanently in post, but in the designated post. It's my understanding that those officers will be replaced in the near future, and I wondered if you had a timescale for that.
I think you'll find that two of those officers still, the two that have moved on actually still work for tendering. There's 3 officers down there at the moment being overseen. We are looking to, no we have, haven't we?
Do you want me to?
Yes, please, because Mr. Williams knows the detail.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Yeah, so as Councillor Baker says, we have 3 officers permanently down there. The 2 officers moved to other parts of the authority. We are advertising as we speak to fill the posts, but we are struggling to fill those posts. So in the interim, we've gone for some agency or an agency officer to provide some support and cover for the officers that are down there at the moment. So we are actively seeking to fill those posts. It's just we're struggling to get hold of environmental health officers because it's effectively a national shortage of environmental health officers as well. So at the moment we're covering it with agency staff. We'll keep advertising, we'll keep trying to fill those posts. So we will still have as many officers as we can get down there to fulfil what we said we would do as part of the Healthy Homes Initiative.
Okay, thanks very much for that. And then the last one, obviously, I was going to touch on Spendles. Obviously, before it was going to open in April, we're now talking later this year. Do you know if we're going to incur any additional costs for that?
I can't comment on that at the moment. I can get you an answer, but at the moment, obviously, we're looking at an extension of time, so there may be costs attached to that, but what they will be, I can't say right now.
That's absolutely fair enough. I just thought I'd ask out of curiosity. So I've gone. No, okay. Thanks very much for coming along, and thanks for your time. It's appreciated. Okay, our next item is a review of the work programme. As those of you who have been working on the latest part of this, which is fly tipping and CCTV, we've made good progress on that. And in fact, we met earlier this evening. So there's pretty much detailed in your documentation where we are and what needs to be done. I don't know, has anyone got any questions, points, or comments on what we've done and where we're going? Is everybody happy?
Chairman, I just want to deal with the other elements of that report. Obviously, you've updated the committee in relation to the work of the enforcement task and finish group. There is a reference in there to a self-funding sort of elements of the budget task and finish group, which was never formed. And probably that we're at that stage in this municipal year that it's probably too late to form a task and finish group to look at that. But it's a nice segue in to say we now need to start thinking about the work programme for 24-25. So the financial scrutiny of that for the council conducted through this committee, which might be through task and finish groups, might be through working parties, might be through a range of mechanisms, but I think needs to be part of that discussion about trying to formulate next year's work programme that will go to the July meeting of council. So, as I say, it's opportune to just talk about it in that general sense and say we'll start to have that process of asking councillors, all councillors, what they think should be on the work programme for 24-25. We'll have that same discussion with officers, and we'll start to arrange some informal meetings with you to discuss that, to try and prioritise what's coming back out of that process, so that that can go to your meeting in June, so that I think it's on the 18th of June would be the envisaged next meeting of this committee, and that will be the one that will need to recommend to full council what your work programme for 24-25 will look like. So that I think is worth recording, that we will start to ask you about your work programme. We do need to think about financial scrutiny particularly, and at your June meeting we'll need to finalise that position, or hopefully finalise that position, so that we can submit to full council in July. The other thing I would say about that, in relation to your work programme, there is now a mandatory requirement on members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to have training on work programming. So again, that's opportune, and on questioning skills. And we have some training booked, I think, for later this month. On, I think it's the 13th of March, there'll be a councillor development session on exactly that subject. So again, I think it's just trying to remind you, firstly, there is a mandatory requirement on members of this committee and the Community Leadership Overview and Scrutiny Committee to participate in the training on work programming and questioning skills, and that's coming up, so 13th of March. I'd also just draw your attention to the fact that as part of your recommendations from your most recent recommendations have both been in respect of budget scrutiny and the sunspot. Both of those have been submitted to Cabinet, and the responses from Cabinet are set out in the pages of the report in front of you. pages 51, 52, 53 and 54. Turning to Appendix C of your report, on page 55, you'll see a number of items that were on, I'll call it the forward plan. Councillor Griffiths has pointed out that since the production of that, there's been a proposed decision in respect of the appointment of the town board for Clacton under the Levelling Up project. So that will be reported to your next meeting, and obviously I think that's a subject that he will be seeking to make sure is scrutinised once we are provided with the detail of that. And I'm envisaging that that further detail will be circulated once we have that decision and the extension of that decision, the full membership of the board, and what powers, if any, that board will have. And I don't want to preempt that by discussing that here today, but just saying it clearly is of import to a number of councillors, if not the whole of the district council, what that board will be asked to do and how it will undertake that function, and I would be seeing that that will be no doubt brought to a wider audience than even this scrutiny committee. So that's the things I wanted to say in respect of this report, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much for that. As Chris has mentioned on the levelling up and wanting to look at the board, there's something that I was going to raise under that, and that was the proposed PSPO for nuisance vehicles, Brook Park. This was something that was looked at under the previous administration, and there was concern that targeting specifically Brook Park may encourage, as we'll use the phrase, nuisance vehicles to move elsewhere. So it was looking at, we looked at a broader area than actually Brook Park. So for example, if the PSPO was effective at Brook Park, we may find that the problem then reappears at Waterglade or somewhere like that. So that's something that I personally would like to have a look at. I don't know if anyone else has got concerns. I think Chris may, because it's within his patch.
I think that would be a good idea, Mr. Chairman, to actually look at that. I think that's an interesting point, especially if you're in the Clacton area.
So that's something, I don't know if anyone else has any comments at this stage. Obviously, we won't say that's an end to it. If anyone else has issues and they wish to raise them after the meeting. Any thoughts, comments? Graham?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be involved somewhere along the line on that, because we have got certain issues, so yeah, have a discussion later.
So I know that the fear was that if we initially, when we looked at the idea of the PSPO for the vehicles, all we would do is move the problem elsewhere, and we wanted to cover that, so it doesn't pop up in another car park or another location. So yeah, I think that's something that we'd like to look at.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, we can certainly put that into the proposals for 24-25. As you say, with anything like a PSPO, displacement and dispersal of the problem is something that would need to be monitored, and I'm sure, as you say, you will, as councillors, want to be part of that process.
So do we have anything else under this item that we'd like to raise? Okay. There's always one.
I was just curious on the carbon neutrality by 2030. We should have had an off-agenda briefing paper at the end of February.
Thank you. I mean, a briefing paper was prepared. We'll just check that it has actually been circulated. If it hasn't, then you've got our apologies for it, the fact that it hasn't been. But it has been prepared and was intended to be circulated. There was an issue about it just going out at the same time as the agenda for this meeting, so we wanted to make sure there was a few days gap between the two. It was slightly delayed, but you should have it. But if not, it will be circulated.
Does anyone else have any comments or thoughts? No? Okay, thanks very much. So that's the review of the work programme. The next item is Treasury Management Update, item 7. Is that you, Richard?
I think it's worth saying that it's introduction. It's a dry old subject, but I think what's drawn out in the report, and we'll touch on in a mo, is how important it is, though, to local authorities, given what's happened over the last 12 to 18 months, certainly at authorities like a near neighbour of ours in terms of investment. So again, that's the best way to say dry old subject, but important. The document, so we've got the Appendix A, which is the capital and treasury strategies. So it's a document that covers the government's arrangements around capital investment, and it also covers the government's arrangements around borrowing and investment for TDC. So it was approved by the leader of Finance and Governance Portfolio Holder for consultation tonight. Then your comments go back to Cabinet and then onto full council at the back end of March. So in terms of Appendix A, hopefully we've tried to highlight the changes. So there's not many changes to the actual strategy compared to one that was put forward last year. It's as always a slight refresh. Some titles changed, and there's a very technical change where how we treat leases in. But apart from that, broadly, the strategy isn't that dissimilar from the one that was approved at full council last year. So refreshed. I think in terms of the cover report, I think there's more important stuff in the cover report actually, in terms of just drawing your attention to a number of bits and pieces. First of all, I know we had some detailed reporting about Birmingham City Council, because we'd lent some money to Birmingham City Council. We'd lent them £6 million, and the report talks about the money being due back in February, the first £4 million, and I can confirm that has now come back into our bank account. So that £4 million has been received, which does demonstrate that there's again, I always feel like tempting fate, but lending money to a local authority it's virtually zero risk. And I've just said that, and something's going to go horribly wrong in the next 12 months. But that with a local authority, that should be the position, because the government step in and don't want defaults in terms of the local public sector. I think one of the things that's really important to draw out in the cover report is the failings that we've seen. Certainly our near neighbour, the problems there over in Thurrock, in terms of the government's included in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act some changes where they can actually make some risk mitigation directions, so they can get themselves involved. It doesn't need a Section 114 notice. They can get involved if certain sort of metrics are breached. So hopefully there's some sort of detailed comments in the report that set out the changes, which I think they're good. They're good changes. I think it just strengthens in terms of the government's involvement where those thresholds are breached, and then they can take various actions. We know the metrics, but we don't know the thresholds as yet. I can't believe we'll be anywhere near close to breaching those, because of our approach, as it's set out in our treasury strategy, is very much risk averse. So we don't do anything too dangerous in terms of credit risk. So it's a fairly sort of safe position. So basically, we want to fundamentally protect the investment made, and if that's at a sacrifice of a lower return, then we're happy to accept that position. So I think it's I think it's one of those sort of documents that I said it is dry but important. I think one of the things that the report's trying to sort of get across as well is that the failings we've seen elsewhere is your assurance, the members' assurance that things are going okay. With the report, it talks about the certain delegations at Thurrock, and I think the words that were used was extraordinary. In terms of the delegations that their Section 151 was given to make certain investments. That's certainly not the case here. The delegations to me, the delegations to the finance team is very much a cash flow management. So we'll be investing in things, we'll be putting money into banks, local authorities, and with the government. Anything where we've seen councils get involved in commercial investments like premises, solar farms, and bits and pieces, none of that is included in here. There's no delegation in here at all. It would all be subject to separate reporting, which would cover the risks as they cropped up. So there's no delegations there. So I think fundamentally, my question is, to some extent, is there anything in there that that doesn't give you assurance, or anything that concerns you in terms of that kind of risk and where we're placed as a council? Because at the end of the day, any money that we have and invest, we want to make sure it comes back. So hopefully that's a good summary of the report and the strategy.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I've got Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If we refer to page 60, this is really in regard to the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act of 2023. And I know in there that we're talking about trigger points and risk thresholds, which if breached would see the government provide risk mitigation direction to local authorities. What I'd like to do, if Richard could just expand a little bit on that, because I note further down it says that the newly introduced metrics haven't been specified by the government. Now that would indicate that we don't actually know what they are. If we turn the page to page 63, when we're looking at the full council report into what basically didn't go too well in Thurrock, one of the points that is actually raised is the level of risk associated with an investment programme was never properly identified or made explicit within the risk reports, and there was no focus from their internal audit function. Now, given that we don't actually know what the trigger events are, it would be very, very difficult for our audit function to pick this up, as they don't have a framework document to look at in relation to the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act. So could you give us a brief say currently of our current understanding of the Regeneration Act, what the risk mitigation are, and could you outline why you're sure that in the event of these of the government bringing in the new matrix, that as a local authority we're going to be in a financially stable situation to comply with them?
That's absolutely fine. I think the metrics we know, because they're set out on page 62, so we know what the metrics are. And basically, there's been some discussion because we talked about offlog in the past, where this new sort of regulator for local authorities, where they also are working on some metrics as well, so they didn't want overlap. So the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act introduced those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 metrics on page 62. So we know what the metrics are. What we don't know is we don't know where the line of the breach is. That will come out shortly. So in effect, for us, I'm confident that the way we take our sort of risk averse approach to our investments, and given the fact that when you look at our outstanding loan debt on the general fund, which is about £130,000, compared to other authorities which are just millions, and we talk with local authorities got billions of pounds worth of debt. It's quite a scary place to be. So ours is very limited. So my view is that we wouldn't be breaching those thresholds, but without knowing what that breach level is, it's very difficult to say. But all I'm saying is that we take a very safe position on investments. So it's not intended to catch us out. Authorities like us, it's meant to sort of trigger those warnings where those authorities that are well publicised in the papers, those authorities that are to some extent pushing the boundaries a little bit in terms of investments. I think one of the things that you get this year, which is vitally important, is that the value for money opinion of our external auditor. At the moment, there is a consultation on when external auditors will have to provide their commentary to local authorities, and I think they're talking about November of each year, regardless of when the statement of accounts are signed off. But our external auditors will hopefully be providing an independent view of our financial standing, and they said early in 24-25. That's our new auditors, not our outgoing ones, because they probably won't get around to doing it. So the new auditors are looking at that piece of work now and should give you that assurance in terms of the overall position, not just on the Treasury side. Treasury will come into it, but it'll be the overall position of our financial standing and financial risk. Because we haven't had a value for money report, when I say we, the local authority sector, most of us haven't had that report for 3 or 4 years. That's a big slice of governance missing and assurance missing from the whole programme. So that'd be really good to come in. I'm really pleased to see that. You'll get a completely independent view. And you could argue that nationally, because there has been no value for money commentaries in many councils, and things have gone quite awry during that time for other local authorities. So there must be a correlation between those two things. So hopefully you'll see that fairly shortly in terms of that assurance. I'm not sure I've given you any sort of hopefully assurance, or have I missed anything out at all there in terms of giving that confidence around what we're doing?
I mean, the thing is, it's a highlight that potentially we don't have the matrices in place, which means your audit function can't kick in, as there's nothing to actually audit against. The only other concern is that if you should have a change in national government later on this year, does that actually affect any of the criteria on the Levelling Up Regeneration Act if the government changes the guidelines after October, shall we say?
There's always that risk with a change of government, and they might do something different. And hopefully not, because this is hopefully just seen as good old governance. I think it's worth saying that a lot of the metrics that are introduced would be included in the work of external audit and internal audit to some extent. So external audit would be looking at it. I think this actually codifies it and makes it a requirement that, not a requirement, but actually the government will intervene. But external audit, the work that's done around that with internal audit and external audit, should be picking up those sorts of high risk things. If we were doing anything risky, that should come through the external audit process. Without this, regardless of this, that should have all been doing to some extent. This just adds that kind of additional sort of layer, more for the government to say, actually, we'll intervene in these circumstances, which is not just a Section 114 notice, because obviously Section 114 notice sort of triggers quite a few actions. This is much more kind of like if a Section 114 isn't issued, the government can still say, actually, we can still intervene if you breach these metrics. So I think I'd like to think it won't get changed significantly if there's a change of government. But again, with all these, there's always a risk, isn't there? But it would make sense if they rode back from it. It would make sense to me.
Are you happy with that, Chris?
Well, I have the assurance that we've at least flagged it up. Hopefully, when we get some more information, that should allow the audit to look at it closely to make sure that we're compliant. I think the only concern I would have is not having the book signed off by our prior auditors over a period of time does create, shall we say, additional concerns, because there's always the problem that potentially you could have your book signed off, the matrices come in, and suddenly you discover that you're not as compliant as you thought you were.
Would you like to respond to that, or?
I think the book, yeah. I mean, the accounts are one thing. I totally take up the point. I think that the sooner you get an independent view on our financial standing and our financial resilience and how we're planning and our sort of overall financial management, the sooner the better, because you've got, as we said, when we set the budget, you've got my assurance, which is fine, but you do need that external audit, and it's one thing that's just crucially missing. But I think one of the things that government have realised in terms of the consultation at the moment that's ongoing around signing the accounts off is they've said even if the accounts are not signed off or the auditor can't sign the accounts off, they'll still endeavour to issue a value for money conclusion, a value opinion. Because for me, it's much more important for you, I think, to receive the overall opinion on our financial standing rather than a set of books being signed off. So that's good, because the government have recognised that. So they're prioritising the assurance-y type work rather than actually the kind of technical accounts, which, as we all know, are fairly impenetrable for most people. So, but I think that commentary. So hopefully, the audit committee obviously involved in that process, but hopefully that comes through. Early 24/5 is the assurance we've got. So that'll be made available widely to all members as that comes in, and they'll update that during the year. But they're doing some work now. They've asked for various documents from us already. So the external audit are looking at it. And in terms of the previous auditor, they have done quite a big piece of work in terms of 2021 accounts, but that included a more up-to-date value for money conclusion in terms of our financial standing. And all I can really say is they said they had nothing to raise at the present time. Vague, it's not. I don't mind that. I'll work with that. If they've got nothing to raise at the present time, I'll take that as a positive. But I think you need a bit more detail around that, which you'll get hopefully from new auditors shortly. So yeah.
Anyone else have any questions? Adrian, then I'll come back to Chris.
Thank you. I've actually got two questions, and if hopefully if the first one's really quick, then I can ask the second one as well. On page 76, the proposed investment contributing to the council's commitment to carbon neutral is that going to be in the report that I haven't had out yet?
So this captures. I think I'm just sort of glancing across what you're looking at there. So this captures as part of our decision making when we do make a capital investment decision. It should cover carbon neutral. It should address it. So even if it's nothing to say this doesn't contribute or it does contribute, it's meant to make sure that it's addressed in any that capital investment decision. So it's kind of prompting that sort of element of governance. Yeah, yeah.
And the other thing also was on page 83 where the general fund has borrowed 0.132 million at fixed rates of 7.04%, and yet we've got a reserve. Is there any, do we have to borrow it at 7.04 when we could borrow it from ourselves and not?
Yeah, there's the issue with that is that we could ask to repay early, but we're not sure. We normally get that premium discounts on it. So when you sort of say, can we walk away from a sort of finish it, it's quite, you get kind of a penalty to do that. So it's always a balancing act about do you take it or do you not. So it's basically because it's such low now, we're just sort of paying it down, get the thing paid off. It's say 132,000 pounds left. Which isn't a bad place for an authority to be. We only owe £132,000 over our indebtedness, so that's pretty good, excluding the HRA, obviously. The HRA is in a different position, so yeah. Thank you.
And you had a second question? Okay. Back to Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regard to page 74, we read that consultation, the views of the local community and stakeholders are an important element in developing the priorities for the council and identifying capital investment opportunities. If we look over the page at page 75, the council faces significant ongoing financial challenges over the period of this capital strategy due to significant reductions in government funding. And my question is that given that we are apparently asking the local community and stakeholders to develop our policy and that we're also looking at financial challenges, how does that actually work? Because most of us have got here the financial report, which is the size of a small telephone directory, and the council is clearly facing significant challenges over the next 2 or 3 years. So my question is, how does the consultation work when unless the majority of people that are commenting on the consultation have access to the government, to the council's financial position, documentation, and the large phone directory size book that goes with it? Anything that you come up with is going to be quite financially risky, isn't it? Because surely you wouldn't have the, shall we say, the financial background documents to make those sort of decisions. It would almost be like you wanting to buy a car and not checking your bank account to see what money you've got before you decide which type Rolls Royce you wish to buy. I mean, it would be quite financially risky to start trying to direct the local authority finance without having the understanding of the financial position. So how does this actually work when we're looking at our annual capital and treasury strategy, when we appear to be opening the door for people that don't have the actual financial information to make the decision?
I think what the strategy is saying is when we develop our capital program, when we develop our investment program, you do need to take into account the views of. So they don't need. So I don't think they need to understand our financial position. I think it's when, as we said, when we develop investment plans, when we develop priorities, as we said in the budget report, there's 3 types of cost pressure that we're aware of, which is business as usual cost pressures. We talked about spend to save initiatives, and we talked about money set aside for supporting the delivery of priorities. So it's a balance in that sense. So basically what we're saying here is is trying to capture that when you have an investment plan, then consultation is a key element to that, because basically on the back of sort of community engagement. So I don't think it's necessarily trying to link. If I've misunderstood you, apologies. Whether we're trying to link, they need to understand that all we're saying is we're developing a list of prioritised actions in terms of delivering the overall council's priorities, and then we'll pick up the funding behind as part of our normal sort of financial planning processes.
If I understand this, then what we're saying is that on this part of the consultation, what we're actually doing is the Cabinet, along with officers, is developing the plan along with the financial background and structures. And then after we've done the initial financial framework work, what we're then doing is then taking the project that's costed out to the local community and stakeholders to consult on. Is that the understanding of the consultation bit? The way that this is written, it looks like the local community make the decisions and put the suggestions in, and the council then sort of finds the money to fund it. And I'm not necessarily sure that's prudent.
No, it's not. I mean, it's not. If it's read that way, that's not the intention at all. Because I think the intention at all is actually what community engagement is doing is developing the priorities, helping develop priorities for the council, and then investment decisions are made on the back of that. So going out once you've got a full, worked up to, that's not the way round. This is just saying is when you actually make an investment decision, you've got to involve a level of consultation. But that's at a priority level, isn't it? So you're not actually consulting on we're doing X, Y, and Z, which you could do. But I'm not saying you're not excluding it. But this is actually trying to say this is the development of the priorities for the council, and identifying capital investment opportunities through that.
Would it be possible then, Richard, to put that price on the front of that, so that when the decision is made, etc., the views of the local stakeholders are made? Because at the moment, that's not there. And I mean, we know from full council how important it is to get the preamble right. So in my view, it would be good if we, in front of the consultation, we actually had that in, so residents are aware that they're actually consulting over a fully costed plan rather than coming out with it themselves. And I think if you had the preamble within that first part, that would help set the scene a lot better, and also give us a little bit of financial security that we're going to have plans that are actually put to the local authority via the cabinet that have been fully costed. I mean, especially when regards to you're doing things like your green and carbon neutral strategy, where I think we might have various sections of the community that have a great interest in the green agenda, but it can be quite costly when you implement it.
I think that is part of separate reports, because I think this is only trying to set the overall sort of framework between. So basically, if a decision was made around an investment plan, then that report that brings that forward would address the consultation angle. But what this report is not saying, or this framework is not saying, is that we're going to go out with a fully costed item to consult on. It's actually the high level priority that we're consulting on, and then Cabinet develop their investment plan around that. So,
is there any way we can get some mechanism in here then where we have some financial reporting on this?
Chris, I wonder if we can capture this as a recommendation and then do it that way.
Okay.
Would that help? Can we do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think that'll help lock that down, and if we get that in as a recommendation, we'll have something down on paper. Okay. Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions? Graham.
Yeah, just a quick one, really, on one of my favourite subjects. Section 106 monies. Is there any link up there? And we're talking about value for money. We're talking about a plan, an investment plan, and capital strategy. And obviously, investment can include open spaces, coastal protection. So, is there ever a link up between Section 106 monies and also the budget? So we might budget for something, we might be £20,000 short. So do we ever look at what is available on Section 106 and marry up the two to ease the budget, and maybe be a little bit creative as well? I'm sure you enjoy creative accountancy. So
Creative account, it's quite a scary thought, creative account. It depends how creative. Yeah, no, exactly. I think it ties in really, really well with the point that this committee made previously when you looked at the budget and you were talking about that kind of prioritised cost pressure list. So actually it's perfect, because if we actually sort of say, what do we need to invest in, and that's driven from a number of areas about what is on that cost pressure list. We talked about cost pressure list, didn't we? Then that's a perfect way to look down that list and say, actually, does this one fit funding from Section 106? So you can go down that list, can't you, and say, actually, this one fits the potential funding from Section 106 really, really well. And then we can look at that. So I think it ties in nicely with what the discussion we had before when we looked at the budget back in, that was January now, wasn't it, when we looked at that. So that kind of cost pressure list and I think that's the best place to pick it up as well there. But yeah, and even if it wasn't picked up there, anything that comes forward that we need to spend money on, I think there is that natural tie up to look towards Section 106 money. So on the housing front, that's exactly what we would do as well, because it's bigger chunks of cash. Sometimes you get with the smaller stuff, it's not as kind of as advantageous, but certainly we can never lose sight of that, because that's really an important funding mechanism for quite a lot of improvements across the district. Yeah.
You happy with that, Graham? Okay. Do we have any other comments? I think we've captured one recommendation. Do we have anything else we'd like to discuss on this item? No? Okay then. Right, well, thanks for your time, Richard. And good to see you here. You're welcome to stay if you'd like, or you're welcome to go if you'd like.
To hang around for the NEPP one, so I'll hang around for that as well. So if I can support the discussion on that, if I'm any use to you.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, Keith would like to make a comment before we start on item 8, which is obviously the street parking arrangements in the district.
Yes, Chairman. I think just for the public record, full council approved an inquiry into on-street parking and the role of the NEP. Back in July last year, it actually allocated that inquiry to Community Leadership Overview and Scrutiny Committee. In talking to the chairman of those two committees, it was brought to this committee, which is why it's here this evening at this meeting, in view of the proximity of the end of the financial year. So I just want to lay on record that it was an inquiry approved to be undertaken in 24-25, as approved by full council last year, and it has been shifted from the Community Leadership Overview and Scrutiny Committee to this committee with the agreement of the two committee chairmen. So I just want to make that clear, just as I say, for the public record, as to why it's here, should anybody have an inquiry later on in this process. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you for that. It just occurred to me, obviously with the connections to Essex County Council, it may be worth me declaring I'm also an Essex County Councillor. I don't know, Councillor Land, would you like to declare as well?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think that would be sensible. Can't hurt.
It can't do any harm, can it? Okay, so on this item, is someone planning to speak on it, or?
Probably useful if Councillor Barry wants to start.
Would you like to start, Mick?
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, if I can, without going into sort of full financial details at this point, if I can just give an overview of my experience as the tendering representative on the North Essex Parking Partnership. So following the elections last year, I was given this job, and my first meeting, I've been to 3 meetings, and if I can just give an indication of progressing concerns from each meeting. So first meeting I went to was June last year, and I had a briefing from officers before I went. There were historical concerns about the budget
in terms of both forecast, actual revenue and expenditure. It was all the figures didn't seem to be adding up. So at that first meeting, I was a new member along with another member from Uttlesford. So there are 6 authorities represented on there, plus the county council. So we raised a number of issues, and Councillor Land, who's the chairman of the NEP committee, so that's his capacity here. We went to we had a scheduled meeting in November last year, and during the course of the discussions again around the budget, I think the question that sort of pulled the rug from under everyone was I asked who the treasurer of the North Essex Park and Partnership was. Now, we're talking here about a 3 million plus kind of outfit, and in the actual agreement between the 6 partner authorities, it clearly states that there needs to be a treasurer appointed, and given the scale of the problems and the scale of the turnover, one would assume there was a treasurer. And the answer I got to my question was a puzzled look from the head of parking services, and a deferential response basically saying that he didn't know who the treasurer was, and he assumed that it would be the Section 151 officer from Colchester. Colchester are the lead authority. They do the accounts. They've got a large number of people employed in the parking partnership to run it and manage it. So there was real alarm bells. Going off, unless it was signed off by the Colchester 151 officer. And we also requested that all the member authority 151 officers had a meeting, a meeting between themselves to identify the information that they might want and the information that we would find useful in order to determine our financial position, because at this point we were coming up to formulating our own budgets and it was becoming apparent that the parking partnership was going to run at quite a significant deficit and that we would have to pay a proportion of that deficit. There's another issue around that we assumed that it was all equal shares, so we would pay a 7th proportion of any deficit. That wasn't clear, and there were some indications that they might apportion it according to the level of debt of each member. So, continuing concerns. So, having requested this meeting, I think our 151 met with other 151s, and we were given a level of reassurance that any further figures would be signed off. So we were scheduled to have another meeting in December, 21st December last year, and it became apparent from the agenda and the pre-meetings that the figures that we'd requested wouldn't be available. So I personally, as a member, I requested that that meeting was postponed until we had the figures. That was rescheduled for the 1st of February. So that was the 3rd meeting I think we had. So on the 1st of February, I said that I wanted monthly updates because we're coming to the end of the financial year. And because the level of concern was so critical, we had actively discussed leaving the partnership because we couldn't control the level of deficit, seemed to be out of control, and the rescue plan that had been put on the table a couple of times in the previous meetings didn't seem to be holding up to scrutiny. So there's a strange formula for leaving the partnership, which is you have to give 12 months notice, but it has to be 12 months at the end of the financial year. So if we were considering leaving the partnership or putting out notice in, it would have to be by the end of this month, by the 31st of March. We would then have to serve a 12-month period, and then we would leave in the 31st of March 2025. If we don't get out notice in by the 31st of March, I think we can assume we are committed to another 2 years, because we wouldn't be able to put our notice in until the 31st of March 2025. So in dealing with all these issues, I've been in correspondence with the head of the parking partnership and asked if we can propose a variation to the agreement, which is to allow us to have the required information to make an informed decision. It's all we want to do. All we want to do is to protect and predict our own financial position. And unfortunately, we still, in my view, have not had the information, and I think it will be backed up, hopefully, by Richard Barrett, who's here, because the last figures we had when I went to the meeting in February, I think the forecast. Sorry, I've got a big dossier on this. The main income for the parking partnership is through penalty charge notices, so fixed penalties, and they had forecasted 1.95 million income across the 6 partner authorities against a budget of 2.25 million. So they were already under budget in terms of what they revised their forecast, and the actual amount collected up until the end of January, the end of December, month 9, was 1.3 million. So they, at the February meeting, they were trying to tell us that they were going to collect over £570,000 in fixed penalty notices in the next 3 months, January, February, March. I queried this because that's actually 30% of their entire forecast in those 3 months. Now, I don't know what your shopping habits or parking habits are, but I don't think that January and February are probably the most prolific months for parking and prohibiting parking and so on. So again, no confidence in their rescue plan or their predictions. So we're in a position. It's quite difficult for me to understand, and I've been to all the meetings, so it's going to be quite difficult to explain. Where we are looking, we're considering giving notice to leave, and that was, I suppose, that was reinforced to some extent by the decision of the partners at the last meeting to impose on-street charges in various parts of the county. You may have seen some quite adverse publicity about charges that were to be imposed in Newland Street in Witham, for instance. They were going to put charges there, short-term charges, also in some residential areas of Colchester, areas of Harlow, Uttlesford. They had proposed, I think, to put some in Walton, and we had made representations before the meeting that we wouldn't accept them, and they were withdrawn. So I was in a position where I abstained on the vote because there was nothing affecting tendering, and the other partners, voted to put forward these charges without any consultation and without really, in my view, going through the proper procedures. Because if you want to put yellow lines outside the school, you have to consult all the houses that are going to be affected. You have to get 75% of the residents to agree. None of that happened. The charges were proposed, and there has been quite a public outcry, and I believe some of those proposals have been called in. So all this paints a picture, and you might be picking up a picture that the parking partnership is not being run as efficiently or as effectively as we would like. But the position for us is quite clear. We can stay in, or we are in it. We haven't put notice of withdrawal. We stay in. We have a voice at the table, and they are looking, or they have proposed charges along our seafront because they are, easy pickings in their view. They would raise quite a lot of revenue and probably solve the financial crisis for the parking partnership. Obviously, we would vigorously oppose those charges because they would displace parking to our residential areas, and it would, make the area less attractive. And there are currently no traffic-related reasons for that to happen. So if we're in, we've got a voice at the table, but what I just said about them suggesting parking charges in other areas doesn't give me confidence that I could, as a lone voice, get the required numbers to stop them doing what they wanted. And this is a county council function. So we're coming up to a deadline. I think by the 21st of March, the meeting, we have to give notice by the end of March, but it's likely that we might be requesting at the meeting for a variation in the agreement to give us either more time to get the information that we feel we need to make a budget decision, a proper informed budget decision, or if we do put in our notice, that we can rescind it if we get the information that gives us confidence that the deficit is going to be dealt with. So I think I don't know whether that sums it up, or whether I've been going with various officers. I mean, I will say that this has taken up inordinate amounts of officer time, and I mean, I'm obviously the representative, and I go along to the meetings, but we have had several hours of meetings with all our officers to work through the issues that related to this, and it's a real distraction. But the position now is we're sort of making a decision that could have far-reaching consequences one way or the other. And as it stands, we can't predict with any confidence what will happen if we stay in or if we come out. So I'm sorry that sounds a little bit vague and a bit complicated, but I'm very happy and the officers are here to answer any questions or give you any further information that we can.
Graham.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. It might be in here somewhere, and I might miss it. Do we know what the performance of the NEPP is in tendering? Do we know how much they make in tendering? Do we know?
At this point, we haven't been given any accounts for separate authorities. It's under one umbrella, although those accounts have been requested in the past. So we don't know how many resources are deployed to our area. We don't know how many PCNs are issued in our area. So it's very much under the one umbrella of the NEPP, covering all 7 authorities.
Yeah, so we're up the river without a paddle, I think. I mean, because what is the option? So if we say, right, we're going to come out, have we got a plan B, or are we just trying to get our way through all the information, or trying to get all the information from the NEPP? But have we got a fallback position at all?
Yeah, we are trying to establish a fallback position by suggesting that there's a variation to the current agreement because it is so time restrictive. You know, you give 12 months notice and that's it. We're saying that that is a too long a period to make an informed choice about what might happen in the future. I mean, the options are. I don't think there's a plan A or a plan B. There's no. I think the option is we we stay in and we perhaps have to take a deficit down the line. I mean, as it stands, I think we've budgeted £100,000 for to cover any deficit this year, and we could go down, you know, year 25, and it could be 5 times that. As it stands, we don't know. So the plan A at the moment is to consider leaving the partnership and to limit that financial cost to us.
Thanks for that, Graham. I just thought, is there anything, Dan, you'd like to add as chairman of the NEP?
Yes, well, thank you very much for inviting me today. I would just be able to tell you the facts and information as I know it. I have been in charge of the NEP, or chairman of the NEP, as you might put it, for probably coming up for just up to a year. The structure, and I think it's really important for you all to have a very good understanding of how NEP works. I think because we've had these issues that have come out and tackled us, I think everybody now wants to know what the NEP does, and I think it's important, and it's certainly one of my objectives as chairman moving forward, for you to all of the districts to understand more clearly how the NEP works, what they do, and when any information is sought and needed. As Councillor Barry has mentioned, and also Andy has said, I think, you know, I'll make sure that that information is forthcoming, and that's what I've tried to do. You'll have to listen to me, I'm afraid. The NEP is the Essex are the lead authority, and effectively they subcontract out this contract of parking enforcement to the NEP. There is a similar organisation called SEP, which covers the south of the county. And effectively, there is a district councillor from each of the 6 districts, which is appointed to represent on the committee, which is Councillor Barry in this instance, and supporting them is an officer from each district, and in this instance it's Mr. Napine, and they're called client officers, which bemuses me, but that's what they're called. There is an emphasis on the client officers who meet before any of the joint committees take place, and have done as long as the partnership, as far as I'm concerned, has been going. And those client officers are informed of what might be coming up at the meeting, what key decisions are going to be made, and what challenges we might, or successes we're facing at that time. I think it's important for me to mention that the structure of those 2 positions is regularly changes. In only having been on the committee a year myself, I think I'm the longest serving member, which says an awful lot. Staffing changes within district councils is common, as we know, and I'm often presented with a new client officer each meeting, should we say. Not a lot of continuity. We've had new councillors recently, and you know, elections and different election periods that other districts have affects the committee. So there hasn't been any continuity, and I'm not sort of drifting from the point at hand, because I think you're very right to scrutinise what the information is that you have in front of you. You know, but I, as a district councillor, I had some information about the NEP and prior knowledge. Effectively, the NEP works for district councillors, parish councillors and individuals who live in this district by offering them the opportunity to have traffic regulation orders placed within the district each year. And anyone off the street can put one in, or if it's enhanced or supported by a district or county councillor, it adds more weight. But very much the issue is, if you've got an issue with parking and you want it sorted out, you come to the district council, a report is put in each year, and 6 of those schemes are put forward. So where we know that there is a need for traffic enforcement, then we proactively go ahead and do that. So that's kind of how the traffic regulations come about, and they're kind of the ones that people want, because we know that they've put in the request for them. These other traffic regulation orders are intelligence and knowledge that have come from other districts and have been put forward at the last meeting. there will be an enhanced amount of consultation in relation to them. And I think it's important to mention, you know, we're in a partnership, or the districts are in a partnership, you know, and with a partnership comes the responsibility to deal with challenges as well as successes. NEP has been a very successful organisation for well over the last 10 years. I'm only telling you as I see it, and it has run into some difficulties financially, and I put that down to a few things. Staffing has been an issue. Recruitment of traffic regulation officers, parking wardens, however you wish to call them, has been really, really challenging, especially since the pandemic, and especially in certain districts within the county, including Harlow. The amount of pay has had to be raised to attract new recruitment, and also the raft of government increases to salaries really hit NEP quite significantly post-COVID. The other thing is human behaviour. People's mechanisms and methods of getting to work or staying at home and working affected the amount of parking charges that were issued. And I think absolutely quite rightly pointed out that NEP are led by Colchester as the lead authority. They have their Section 151 officer who deals with the financial side of things, and I think it's correct to say that whilst everything was looking rosy, everyone was quite happy to sit back and just and listen and be part of that success. But things have gone a little astray. I'm pleased to have tried to get better levels of communication around the structure, about the finances, about the information flows, and Councillor Barry, I'm sure, will agree that I've pushed that quite hard, and where necessary I've listened to districts when they've wanted to either postpone or they've needed extra time to make decisions. I think that's a lot of what I wanted to say, and I think things are looking more positive in relation to the deficit as such, and I think we'll turn a surplus for the year. As I've said, the partnership is a partnership. I think you would want to be very, very clear and very understood of what the outcome would be as if you did leave the partnership. Be very, very clear about that. You know, sometimes the grass isn't always greener, but that's not me defending NEP in this instance. I'm actually just saying that would be a very responsible thing for you to understand, all of you, or for any cabinet decision that's made. I will continue to try to be as transparent as we can. As it's been quite rightly pointed out, I think there's been quite a sort of a cloudy thing floating around the NEP. It's all going well, no one makes a noise, and now, you know, in my short time there, the old hot potato is hotter than you can imagine, and it's been a real quite challenge really. But I've tried very, very hard to make sure that the information flows are better, and that what you need you're getting. So I mean, I could go on and on about NEP. It's a big organisation. It does a lot of things, and you know, it will be a balanced decision as to whether you make a decision to come out or to stay in.
Thank you. Chris, then Adrian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to say that I'm not really relaxed about staying in an organisation where we could be having a large liability financially, where we have no control over what's going on, don't appear to know how big it is, and where their audit function seems to be on par with some other councils that are having financial problems. I have to say that the discussion of NEP reminded me a bit like the EU, because once again we have faceless officials and elected people that most of my residents don't elect or have a say in or know, deciding whether or not they have parking meters outside their house, and our local representative going up there and not being able to veto it. I mean, my view is very, very simple, that one, we need to be able to control the costs if we're going to stay in, and two, our representative on that board needs to be able to veto where parking machines and ticket machines are put. I mean, my view is that if it's done on road safety grounds, then fair enough. If residents request it, then fair enough. But it shouldn't be down to faceless officials in the middle of nowhere deciding that my residents in Marine Parade West have a parking meter outside their house because somebody thinks it's a good idea sitting in Colchester. I mean, a lot of our older towns have very, very narrow driveway and no garages, which means residents' cars are in effect parking on the road because there is nowhere else to park. In my ward, we have the hospital there as well, which also means that, you know, people visiting the hospital are parking on the seafront. The last thing that we want is somebody deciding it'd be a good idea to make everyone's life a misery by sticking parking meters all along the seafront, which won't only stop people getting to the hospital, but will create a whole range of havoc throughout the year. Now, I'm not happy with this. We didn't sign up to be dictated to by a bunch of people where we have parking meters. And it really isn't a question of whether or not the grass is greener on the other side. It's a question of when we send our representatives there and they say our residents don't want it, the rest of the organisation should be looking at it. And it's not a question of then saying, well, there's a mechanism where we can oppose it. It shouldn't be happening full stop. Because what we're in effect saying is a bunch of people that most of us don't elect and don't know can dictate where we park outside our own houses and in our communities. And that cannot be right. And in my view, if it's going down that way, then we should be seriously looking for a plan B and leaving. I don't realistically see how we as a committee can in any way, shape or form be suggesting that we stay in an organisation where we can't control costs. And I'm sorry that you're the chairman, but that's how I feel, and it may not be representative of this committee.
Yeah, I happened to download the net financial update, which I think is what Councillor Berry was reading from. And the actual spending for the 9-month period was £2,524, 252,400, I think. Which, if you divide that by 9, makes 280,000 that they're getting from as an income each month. If you multiply that by 12, it gives you 336,500, which would then mean that their forecast for the 31st of March, which is 368,300 pounds, is wrong by 318,000 pounds. So I'm very confused with their figures, and I've got that there. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, it's almost, that's creative accounting. Also, the other thing that I read that seems to be a bit problematic is I noticed that they did ParkSafe schools cameras. Now, it wasn't in our ward, but they did do it somewhere. It was a pilot project. It was effective in reducing contraventions of the school yellow zigzag markings. In fact, in excess of all predictions. And it reduced its contravention levels by 82%, which is really, really impressive. But they removed it because it wasn't making enough money. So is it a park safe camera to make the area safe, or is it about making money? And that, for me, just, it doesn't seem right. It just seems like we're just trying to make money rather than just catch people. You know, if people are parking badly, then catch them for that. But don't try and catch them out just for the sake of trying to make money out of everybody.
There's a few points there for you, Mick. I don't know if you'd like to respond to those.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try and pick those up. I think, firstly, Councillor Griffith's point about not having control of the finances and not being able to veto proposals for our own area is correct. I I find it really difficult to, I mean, as Councillor Land has said, it is a partnership. So there is a shared responsibility for taking on board some of these suggestions. But we feel that any suggestion to put on-street charges along our seafronts would be totally unacceptable for the reasons that you've said about displacement, about affecting tourism and so on. And what Councillor Land is again correct in saying that one of the functions of the NEP is to put in traffic regulation orders, which are yellow line signs, and red lines, yellow lines. But in doing that, my understanding is that there is a lot of consultation and a lot of evidence required to put those TROs in the first place. They're not allowed, and again, maybe one of the officers can help me out here legally. I don't think they are allowed to impose parking charges simply to raise revenue, and I think that's that's a legal position, because otherwise they'd be putting red lines, yellow lines everywhere. So I don't think that's legal, and that would be challengeable. And I think that's one of the reasons why the proposals made at the last meeting have been called in. But just to finish your point, Councillor Griffiths, I think if we stay in, we do have a voice. If we come out, we don't. But whether we are forceful enough and we can have a voice outside of the authority in the same way, because it's ultimately the county council who make that decision about putting those parking charges in. So I entirely agree with your statement there. In terms of the figures not adding up, I mean, I I think we've been through these. Councillor Smith made the point. We've been through these with our 151 and with the portfolio holder for finance, the leader of the council, and with a number of other officers, and we would entirely agree that they do not add up, and that the predicted, the forecast outturns, again, do not fill us with confidence. The parking cameras outside the schools were very effective in reducing illegal parking, and that's the job. That's why they're put there, to stop people parking outside. But they did take quite a lot of investment in the digital infrastructure to put them in. They also operate a camera car which goes along, and we've resisted having that in our area because we weren't convinced that it was cost effective enough, and we never did see the finances for it. So they did stop doing that outside the schools, and again, we're not party to any of those decisions. That was I think an organisational decision by them to try and reduce the deficit. So yeah, and Councillor Land's explained the thing. While we are making money, or while it was making money, there was no need to put this level of scrutiny on the accounts. It was bringing in money, and it was funding the TROs. The other issue with the whole structure and organisation and financial makeup is that the partnership agreement says they have to have a £400,000 reserve at all times before they can implement any TROs. Currently, they used up that reserve last year to pay off the deficit, and they're currently running at a £160,000 deficit, I think. So effectively, they're operating potentially borderline, I'm not saying illegal, but there's some question about the legality of introducing charges simply to raise revenue, and there's a question about putting in lines and red lines and implementing TROs without the required balance in the accounts. And these are issues that I have raised, and myself and other councillors from other areas are equally as concerned. I won't name, but there are 6 partner authorities, and I would say 3 and probably 4 of them are raising the same level of concerns that we are. So I think something has to give, and basically all we want is signed off figures that we can trust, that we can then use to make an informed decision on our own budgets, because we have to put in potentially quite a significant amount to pay out a proportion of any deficit. The thing about the partner authorities all being assessed for their contribution to the deficit, is a strange one because at the last meeting, for some reason, there was a historical account of the previous finances when the partnership was set up in 2010, which showed that tendering was one of the biggest debtors, if you like, in terms of income or expenditure. That was, I don't know what, there was no relevance at all to me in my mind. But if they were to say, right, we're going to try and identify how much time we spend, how much revenue we get, what the deficit level is for tendering, that's entirely unfair in my view because we have no control over how they allocate those resources or how they collect revenues. It's entirely their decision. So, we will say we'll pay what we should pay, a seventh, but we're not going to be paying a large proportion of a deficit that we have no control over how that deficit has arisen. So that, again, there are always more questions than answers with this situation. I think you've probably become aware of that during the course of this discussion, and there are still quite a lot of unanswered questions to take to the meeting on the 21st of March. But I think the cabinet will have a position on that, and we'd be more than happy to take on board any recommendations that you feel appropriate.
Thanks for that, Mac. I've got Dan and then Lisa. One thing you raised is about the number of tickets issued. I've had for some time a concern in my division about a particular road. I won't go into specifics, but a particular road where it has residence parking permit and there seems to be an unusually high number of tickets issued. So I made a formal request for the number of tickets issued in that road for a 6-month period, and I chose 4 other roads with residence parking permits and requested the number of tickets issued in those roads, and they were able to provide me with that information, and they did. So it's only a suggestion, but you may like to make a formal request for the number of tickets issued, and that may give you a bit of an insight. Anyway, Dan, there's been a couple of questions and comments made. I wondered if you'd like to respond, and then I'll pass on to Lisa.
I mean, as I pointed out, or hopefully I've pointed out, I'm chairman, but I've seen this organisation running and I've used its services and facilities quite extensively in implementing traffic regulation orders across areas that I represent. And that is the support and that is the function and the business model of the NEP. We're not in the business of putting in new lines, yellow lines, red lines, whatever it might be, just to raise income. The issue that has compounded itself with this conversation in mind is, especially with these other traffic regulation orders that were put forward at the last meeting, not for tendering as was pointed out to you, is that it looked like we were just trying to put in lines for the sake of it. Well, that's not the case. Our business model is to manage parking, manage better ways of traffic movements, and that's what we do, and it's done based on solid, sound evidence from experts that do it. I want to just touch on the structure. I think that they rely heavily or completely, especially from a financial standpoint, on Colchester Borough Council staff and their 151 officer. They don't have their own dedicated sort of director of finance, if you want to put it as such. So I think moving forward, I think the structure of the organisation probably needs to evolve, because we all know that people like Richard at the end there, they don't have hours and hours to throw at individual projects. They're looking at a multitude of different things. So this is the same for this guy that's looking after the NEP. He's dealing with every other little thing that's going on in Colchester Council financially, but he's also the business partner for NEPs, which puts probably quite a bit of pressure on him, especially at the moment. I'll give you a little bit of foresight and insight. I was involved in a meeting yesterday with the chief exec, or the managing director of the parking partnership. He sits on the British take that back. He sits on the British Parking Board, and he's due to be chairman of that organisation next year from May onwards. So he's got a lot of credibility and clout, and he understands parking inside out and backwards. And there's been too much in the past pressure on him in trying to deliver financial information at meetings, which is why I, along with the support of people like Councillor Barry and his predecessor, Councillor Porter, put pressure on the NEP as the new chairman to make sure that we get some financial detail, and that Richard, the parking manager, is not put under pressure every month, because he's meant to be there to tell us about parking and all the boring stuff that comes with it. Believe me, it can be. So the structure of the NEP, and he said to me in a meeting yesterday, he said, well, it's a bit like a chicken and an egg, because we're going to be back here in another couple of years. Because what's not keeping pace with wages and inflation is the parking charge fee. Now, the parking charge notice fee is set by the government and has been stagnant for many, many years. And I think it's, if you pay it within a certain amount of time, you get it for 30 quid. And if you leave it over a certain amount of time, it goes up to 60. So you can imagine most people try to pay when it's £30. And then we have a percentage of the total parking charge notices where people don't pay, and that goes off to a bailiff, and we try to seek back that money each month, which also has an impact on the financial calculations and presentations, because we never know quite how many of those people are going to pay. Once again, it's a bit of foresight or insight for you, but he said we will be back here once again, because unless the government change that, the inflation and the wage increases, that if they still continue to come, they are going to be putting us in exactly the same position. So I feel that's a bit, slightly balanced in what I've said. I'm not here to support the NEP. I'm here to give you some insight into what decision you might make. The structure of the NEP will inevitably and undoubtedly have to change, I think, and we will get a picture in the coming years as to how people's parking activities, whether they go back to what they were pre-levels or pre-COVID levels, or whether they completely change. We're seeing parking charges go up now. I think we've got full recruitment, which we haven't had for some years. So you're sort of between a rock and a hard place, really, because you could give the organisation a bit more time to pull itself round, which I'm confident it will do financially, or you could make a decision to sort of sit outside the tent but still listen in on what's going on. So yeah, that's probably what I've got to say on the matter.
Thanks for that, Dan. Lisa?
Thank you, Chairman. I just was going to respond to a couple of comments that were made during the members' debate so far. First thing I want to just go back to, and Councillor Dan Land described it very well, but I thought it would be useful for the committee just to consider the structure again. So Essex County Council has the power and responsibilities under the Traffic Management Act and the Road Traffic Regulation Act 1984 for the enforcement of civil on-street civil parking enforcement. So Essex County Council has delegated that control of local parking policies and management of associated functions to be delivered by a joint committee, of which tendering sits together with 6 other councils. I believe there's seven in total. Yeah, so I just wanted to remind the committee that this isn't tendering District Council has given powers to anybody else to do. These are Essex County Council functions which tendering is sitting on a joint committee to have a say on. So that's one thing I wanted to just recap on. I know Councillor Land described it. The other thing was Councillor Barry mentioned in relation to setting policy and not raising money. There is statutory guidance which the government produces in relation to civil parking enforcement, and one of the things it says in its guidance is that for good governance, enforcement authorities need to forecast revenue in advance, but raising revenue should not be an objective of civil parking enforcement, nor should authorities set targets for revenue and the number of penalty charge notices they issue. So the government's guidance is very much that it's not about raising money, and enforcement authorities within their parking policies should have regard to managing traffic network, improving road safety, improving local environment, improving the quality and accessibility of public transport, meeting the needs of people with disabilities, and managing and competing demands for curb space. So they're the sort of principles that policies should be made upon. And as I understand it, the NEP has a big a business plan and has parking policies that it has previously agreed. So I can only assume that anything that the NEP are making decisions on is in accordance with their policies that they've drafted.
Okay, Adrian.
I was curious about the bit about the camera car. So it seems that we've requested financial reports showing the viability of this way of enforcing, and they've not been submitted. But we've also refused the use of the camera car, presumably because we haven't given the financial reports. So is it possible we could get those reports? Is the car camera?
I'm sure Paul knows more about the camera car than I do. I don't know a lot about it because it doesn't operate in this district, but it leads into a very good point. So I have, as I've mentioned, implemented quite a number of traffic regulation orders across my district and county division, which have been needed, wanted, and have been very successful. The downside to some of these red route implementations that have gone in, from my point of view, is that an officer from the NEP has to attend in his car and he has to stop and he has to write a ticket. And if there's 6 cars on a red line, he has to write 6 tickets. Now, there's a reason why Tendring didn't want the car in the division or in the district, sorry, and I believe it was due to some sort, and I'll quote the word big brother, that because this is what's the word I'm looking for? It's inscrupulous. It basically, it drives along, and if you're 6 cars on a red line, they're all getting a ticket, and the officer hasn't got to get out in the car. Now, that would be really helpful to me because I've had some red routes put in Stevenson Road, if you're familiar with Gorse Lane Industrial Estate, and it's quite a challenging area to, as an enforcement officer, to have to park up, to stop, to walk around big trailers, to walk around lorries, to walk around a bustling street. And it would be very, very helpful, and it would increase the district's income from traffic regulation orders. There's no doubt about it, in my opinion, because it sweeps along and it comes along. And I've mentioned it to the leader of this council informally, and not because I'm the chairman of the NEP. I think it would be a good introduction. I don't know anything about figures that have been requested. All I can tell you is I think that just from the previous administration, it was just a straight no, and it's not been discussed since, and I think it should be discussed personally, from my own personal, as an individual and a human being who's had traffic regulations put in. Was there another point? That's about the car, really. I did want to speak about the car tonight, so I just managed to get that in. Thank you.
You had a point.
Mr. Chairman. I'll be quite blunt. I have a fundamental problem with officers of the state driving around in cars with cameras on them. I think this, if you want to go and live in a society where that happens, I'm sure if you move to North Korea or Russia, that they have the sort of similar sort of surveillance. But in a free and democratic society, you know, there are far better ways of doing it, and I would prefer to see an officer getting out and actually ticketing the car than having some faceless official driving around in a car with a camera on it, taking photographs of the local population. I don't think that that's the sort of thing we want to see in our country, and on civil liberties I have major issues with it. On a more lighter point, I do think that if we're looking to discuss our future with the net, there needs to be a plan B. And my view would be, if you can't control the finances, if you can't control where people are telling our residents where to park, serious consideration should be given at the end of the month to saying we want to go at the next year. But I do think that before we do that, a conversation has to be made with Essex to say, in the event of us deciding to leave, you know, what is plan B? How does parking continue after we leave? Could we bring it in-house? And what are the alternatives if we decide to give notice? Because while I understand there may be some that like the you know, European economic model of utopia on car parking, there are others that have major difficulties on having outside officials dictating where our residents park especially when we can't control how much potentially it could be costing TDC. So I do think that there needs to be a conversation urgently to be had prior to the date when we have to give our notice to see if it would be possible. And my recommendation would be, as part of this, that the relevant officers and cabinet members have the conversation with Essex County Council to see what the arrangements would be in the event of them leaving, not necessarily because we intend to leave, but I think there should be a plan B on the table. And let's put it quite bluntly, I think that will strengthen Councillor Barry's hand if he's already asked what happens when we go. Because at the moment, not knowing doesn't give him a good negotiating tool. Whereas if he's in a position where they are of the opinion that we're looking to do something different, that just might help you when you're negotiating next time round. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can I ask Adrian to comment? And then I'll be honest, I had made a few notes before I came along this evening, and I'd like to go through those before we progress from there. So, Adrian?
Just going back to the car camera again, I've actually been out in my ward with a parking enforcement officer who was giving someone a ticket for parking illegally, and that person must have given him at least 15 minutes of abuse. I don't think anyone's job, I appreciate it's his job, but I don't think anyone's job should be that. And if all it would take is for him to drive past with a camera and then issue a ticket without getting out and having to be, suffering that, I don't think that that's a bad thing.
Okay, Andy, would you like to comment, as I say, and then I'd like to say a few words?
Just to clarify what this car can actually do, it's very limited in what it can issue with regard to PCNs. It's only certain red routes that it's viable. It can't issue PCNs for single yellow lines, double yellow lines, limited waiting areas, because they've all got certain criteria that you can have to legally park. So if you're a blue badge holder, for instance, you can park on a double yellow line. So it's the red routes with a criteria where there's no parking by anybody at any time. That's what it's limited to. So it wouldn't help in most of our areas in tendering. It would help, as Councillor Dan Land said, in Gorse Lane Industrial Estate, where there's red routes. There's some in Brightlingsea outside schools. So it's very limited. It won't do what a civil enforcement officer will do throughout the day, just to clarify what it can.
Yeah.
Is that something that we've introduced, or is that across the board? Everyone has the same?
That's across the board, because it can only take a photo of the car. You have to have that criteria in place in that traffic regulation order to issue that PCN. So it's no parking at any time, no matter whether you've got a blue badge, whether you're unloading or anything else. There is no parking there. So that's the only time it can issue a PCN.
Okay, thank you for that. So I said, this is something I think Dan touched on before. The NEP has been a bit of an issue with me for quite some time, several years in fact, even before we had financial problems. And I did make a few notes that I'd like to go through, so forgive me if I'm reading it rather than talking. In my view, the NEP appears to have adopted a one-size-fits-all approach to the on-street parking enforcement, and as a result is unable to recognise when local issues need addressing. This in turn means specific enforcement action is not being taken when needed. In coastal areas such as ours, the level of support needed can vary due to several issues, including the time of year, whether there are events organised, or simply the weather forecast. NEP enforcement officers have not responded to this, rarely being around in the evening or available at night, or when special events are organised, for example. As the report states, there has been a reluctance by the NEP to accept offers of support for enforcement other than outside schools, which has now been discontinued. There's also been a reluctance to delegate authority to issue penalty charge notices to any enforcement officers unless employed directly by the NEP. Listening to local people, this has resulted in an increasing number of complaints and dissatisfaction from residents. To me, there are two possible solutions to help with this. The first one is the return of all non-street parking and management to the district by means of a service level agreement with Essex County Council, creating a situation where local parking enforcement would be tailored to meet local needs by tendering district council. TDC would operate the on-street service at nil cost, with surpluses paid to Essex County Council for local highways related schemes, and any losses that would be met by tendering district council. Alternatively, for delegated authority to be given to tendering district council enforcement staff to enforce on-street parking within tendering alongside officers from the NEP. TDC would not seek any financial remuneration for this arrangement. Personally, I would prefer the first option, but in my view, either of these proposals would benefit both Essex County Council and tendering district council, and would show the two councils working together for the benefit of local people. In 2021, these proposals had the support of the then leader of tendering district council, the chief executive and TDC senior officers, but this was never progressed. So that's what I'd written. My concern is if we walk away from the NEP, instead of having a degree of opposition or resistance, we'll have nothing. It will in effect be imposed on us, and there'll be no votes, no reasoning, no argument from us. If they think it's a good idea, then we're getting it. Our residents, and I'll be a little bit selfish here and say my residents have got roads leading off the seafronts. If we start seeing parking meters and additional charges on the seafront, it will just shift the problem into the side roads where we'll have additional concerns. I think it will be the same in other areas such as Walton. So part of me thinks we should leave the NEP, but once you sit down and reflect on it, I think we really do need to argue the case, but we need to come up with a solution that helps the NEP, but more importantly helps us. So it becomes a teamwork. By bringing the powers down, I can think of areas where the NEP never visit, and it has caused real frustration and anxiety for our residents in the summer months. So, as I say, they're my thoughts. I don't know what other people think on those. Obviously, when I look through, I know Cabinet are looking for a recommendation from us to go to their meeting on the 12th. So I don't know if, from what I've read, that looks to be a recommendation or the starting of something we can go forward with. Graham, your thought?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think listening to everybody, obviously there is a certain amount of all in agreement. It's probably to what level, but if other members of the partnership are feeling the same as what we do, then surely there must be some wriggle room there that we can have a consensus and we can have a meeting. Is it worth saving? I think that's the question we've got to ask. Is it worth saving? We know it's been successful in the past. We know it's been successful with the schools, to control parking, and a safety issue for our youngsters across the. So we know that it does do good things, and I think that we should really get a plan, get together, and so just sort of come to a consensus. And I take your point, Chairman. Some good points there, but I think we need maybe a little bit of negotiation along the way.
I think that's the point I'm trying to make. Rather than a yes or no, we need a counter proposal, one that helps our residents and obviously helps Essex County Council, because if it doesn't, they're going to say no straight away. So it's striking a balance between the two. but I do fear just walking away means that we're the empty chair in the room where everybody else thinks it's a good idea, and oh, by the way, tendering haven't complained because they can't. Chris.
I mean, I do share your concerns. I don't think just walking away and leaving them with full control it's probably even worse than what you've got now, if that's possible. I mean, my view for a recommendation to the Cabinet would be that they explore a plan B and look at options to see what would happen in the event of us leaving, with a view to see if we can get a service level agreement to bring the parking on-street function back in-house, because that way that then removes us out of the shall we say, grouping. It gives us back controlling of our costings, and it also gives us control over where parking enforcement goes, and you'll still have a working relationship with Essex County Council. I mean, that would be the preferred option. If that's not possible, then I still think we need to have a look at a plan B to see whether there's other partners that we could join with that are similarly not happy, and maybe have a smaller version that we have a greater control over.
Mark.
I was going to say, I do actually agree very much with your suggestion, and I think your first option was probably the best one. The other thing that I wanted maybe that we should be doing is, if we want to up the volume, I mean, we did talk about finding about information of what scrutiny has been done at the other 6 partners, what they've done, what scrutiny is being done, and maybe working perhaps on teams or something with other, the other scrutiny committees in the other partners to see what they think about it as well, because, we're hearing comments that some of those, councils have concerns, but maybe let's up the scrutiny function and try and do some joint working with the other scrutiny panels at, committees at the other councils to come forward with an idea as well. Because I think if it's only us that are complaining and everybody else is towing the line, then that's one thing. But if everybody is unhappy, then that, it may be only Colchester are happy. But
well, can I suggest then, because we've been going for quite some time now, as the recommendations, there's 3 things that occurred then. Obviously, there was the 2 solutions I put forward. We can put them forward as recommendations to Cabinet, which gives them something to go forward with, to say there is alternatives other than yes, we're in, no, we're out. But the other thing is, I'll ask the officer to write to the other councils' scrutiny committee chairs to ask for their findings, if any, on the NEP and report it back to us.
Sure, and whether they're open to some form of joint scrutiny going forward.
Are we happy with that? That gives something for Cabinet to say, actually, there's input from the council. We want others. This isn't the first time it's been mentioned. This was mentioned in 2021, and it didn't. I think it met with passive resistance. Nobody said no. The problem I had was nobody said yes. I know it sounds odd, but that's what we met with. And it was something that I didn't want to drop, because I think there is a sensible solution that benefits both. We're the local people, we're localism, we're accountable for what people miles away are doing. But the other side is we also know where to look for people that are deliberately breaking the rules because they know they won't be discovered there. And it's actually an area I'm thinking I was in Chris's patch, where we've had motorists parking up in numbers, and I don't think a ticket has ever been issued because the NEP just doesn't know it's there. So I would need a seconder for what was suggested. Adrian and Chris, we're doing okay. Okay then, so yeah. Everybody in support? Okay, so hopefully we've been a bit productive tonight on this one, and perhaps you could let us know how you get on, and we'll obviously share our responses that we receive with yourselves. So thank you very much for coming along. And that was the final item. So thank you all for coming this evening. I know it's been a bit longer than we usually have, but I'm sure we've done the meeting